Welcome to Mindful Drawing. I'm Robert, and I'll be your guide on this meditative practice that enters a space of mindfulness through the act of drawing. I have the page in front of me from today's exercise, recording the introduction afterwards, as is often customary, never really knowing where the intentions set out beforehand will go. This week, we'll look at a concept of behavior or operations, of nesting, bundling, layering, working with simple organic figures, something with a little bit of movement that captures space, closes around it, becomes a cell of paper on the inside and paper on the outside. We begin to explore those in many scales, sizes relative to each other, nesting within, gathering, bundling, clumping up, becoming deep territories for exploration, and see where it goes in the 20 or 30 minutes we have. We can get a lot of shapes down on a page, gather them together, clustered or expanded, and start to form something new, a place for imagination. I'm just going to use the felt tip pen, nice smooth movement, easy to connect with the breath, easy to feel through the fibers of the paper, lays down ink without resistance. A pencil will work well also. Just keep your hand up, don't smear it around too much, or let it smear and see where it goes. It's always up to you with your exercise. It's not about all the best techniques for drawing, but about exploring techniques you can use to express yourself through drawing and be mindful of how you engage with that practice. The other lesson in today's exercise is knowing how you draw, being aware of your presence, and seeing how you can guide that, lean into it, and discover through your own engagement with mindful drawing. Go ahead and gather your supplies, establish your space, and let's draw together. You want to do a little bit of warm-up to find your shape, to find the way of drawing something loose, but defined. Just use a piece of scrap for the back side of the page and kind of a circle, but maybe a little bumpy, like a bean, something a little less defined geometrically, a little amorphous, and maybe a few around that piece of scrap that take on a little different character. One thing I think we'll look at is the fitting of shapes. So the bump in or out of one shape can take on and hold another in that nesting relationship. They can also grow on their own out in space and slowly work towards each other, squeezed in between. It can be complex or simple, one round shape or inflecting in and out. And we'll look at some that are large, and some that are smaller as they pack together. My thoughts on the exercise were something fairly contained, intense, but like this little warm-up that's happening, it may also be interesting to spread out and make it more growth and organic based, whatever suits you, but I think I'll go inward. Other parts that we'll look at are giving edge to something lightly, maybe thickening it, retracing along, and giving fill to something, just sticking with that same idea of shapes packing within, that nesting and layering to make some dense bundling form. And then will be a larger part of the exercise and maybe finding a connecting or unifying idea that wraps some layers around it, building up a translation from the edges of things out to a new space. And that'll take us through all the technique or small things we might work with. Before we dive right into the larger exercise, just taking a moment to find our space, find our setting, get stable with the ground, with our seat, however we are, get stable with the shoulders and the back and the hips just by moving them a bit to feel where they're at. And with a good couple of inhalation and exhalation cycles, expanding everything out, stretching it a little bit to the edges, and then letting it sink back in. An inhalation that expands, and an exhalation that rests into place. Noticing all the little pieces of the chain connecting together, finding something hopefully comfortable and stable to support you in the exercise. Maybe one more nice cycle. And let it out to open and be ready to engage with the paper. Somewhere in that big empty space, whether a sketchbook or a pad, finding the place to begin and just bringing one of those ideas of shape as our locator, our initiator of figure onto the page. That first demarcation of something in the nothing. And with this first one, we'll give it a little attention to know it, to play with the speed of our hand and drawing by giving it an outline or an inset line, just a light offset or wall to its shape, a tracing back along. And it's okay if there's some wobbling in and out, each shape its own, a little different than the previous. We do a second round of that, trying to stay close and tight. But it's okay if something jumps away as we move in a fairly complex organization that may engage our hand very differently at different times. And from that, we can start to see enhanced some of the points of inflection or bump on the exterior, and look at extending new shapes out from there. Similarly, finding their own unique profile, but nestling into a portion of what's present. Some may be large, building on a space of flatness. Some may be tight, fitting into a little dent. Some may fold over, kind of press against, or press out from their neighbors. Some may set softly within as we explore that idea of shape gathering around, pressing towards each other, extending out, following the shapes that your eye catch. We can use these larger movements to find our breath, stabilize our attention in the exercise. On the next one, when you're ready for it, breathing in to establish where you'll engage, and breathing out to initiate a slow, even pace of drawing around that space to capture it with shape. Seeing, if you can, over the next few, to follow the breath all the way through the cycle. Even if it runs out from the start, listen to that emptying of the lungs. It won't be too long till the end, where you can breathe in again and begin on another trajectory. Larger or smaller shapes, changing the speed of the hand with the breath. perhaps going very slow to fill in tight spaces. Or larger and more even to cross broad territory. We continue this cycling of finding connection between the movement and the breath by adding a little bit of outline to each shape. Whatever feels good to you, 1 or 2 layers. Tracking that in-breath to out-breath as an establishing and expressing relationship. Tracking with the eye, with the sensors in the fingers and the hand, that speed of exhalation and speed of movement. The breath can be at a comfortable pace, which may bring a little bit of discomfort or unease to the movement of the fingers. And just noticing that it won't last long, or perhaps it's interesting. A different sensation at every moment as we move around the novel contours of each shape. Noticing our own body's rhythm and connection back to that cycle of inhalation and exhalation. A time of slowness, of empty, quiet connection there between your extension outward, the pen or pencil, the medium of interface, the paper, and the guide of the breath. And your mass or collection of shapes, whether growing out in many directions or clustering around, your trajectory you find, the shapes guide you or follow. You can begin to look inwards to those, just like the outline, finding potential shape within shape, nesting and gathering, finding density through contouring or layering, and go work again from the origin, the center, bring a little more thickness and definition to its edges, continuing to follow that breath, but letting it become a natural rhythm into the background, a subtle reminder of presence as we breathe in between starts and stops. But the exhalation may settle into its own pace, with the hand moving with a memory of that time spent connecting. And at any time as you draw, you might find opportunities where shapes emerge from edges, start to fill out space, contracting in the contours. Rocks stacked upon rocks, cells within cells, a nest or a nestling place. As you work through some of these shapes gathered, spending a little time with it, quiet, looking at the contours, deciding, do we add more layers or come in and fill out some space with new shapes? Whichever one at the moment feels engaging, larger, more even shapes perhaps call to the smoothness of contour, tighter, more inflecting shapes may call for the filling of small, new forms. Just a few minutes to fill out some space there at another scale, shrinking down, shrinking inwards, following your senses and your intuition as you draw. We may begin to notice many spaces in between, gaps between the shapes at all levels. The first, larger organizing, the second, nesting, packed within. We can follow this further down, repeating the technique, staying with the breath, and finding more shapes nested at new sizes. Something like an ear of corn or the pod of a pea, just collecting them more and more densely. Their outer boundaries, each more unique with the expansion of quantity, but more similar with the contraction of size. Packing into space that nesting and layering of shape. Me, I'm drawn to working around the perimeter, defining new regions towards the interior, and using those as the guide for letting my wrist and fingers play with how a shape is defined. Noticing the direction of drawing and the direction of engagement. Are you working around or sporadic, jumping here and there, clockwise or counterclockwise? And when you begin to notice a behavior, sticking with it, making it part of your attention, your presence with that action, looking into it for rhythm, letting it drift from that background intuition to the foreground of mindfulness. That noticing and bringing forward awareness to perhaps natural tendencies. Maybe it's guided by the right or left-handedness. Maybe it's guided by patterns we're used to, clock, or your orientation to the paper shifted to one side. As we watch and observe that tendency and let it become an action, They become part of our way of engaging, a way of potentially creating, expressing, finding form in the shapeless. Finding figure in space. It becomes an aspect of our technique, our way of reading the visual territory, our way of operating with an instrument, pen or pencil. And from time to time practicing with that way that comes from you, so that when at other times your attention is on the idea, the concept, or the production, that way serves you well practiced without necessarily all of the conscious attention. Exercise required in all things to know the motion, to know the breath and the ease of the mind. To know if our tendencies can serve us in situations, or if they begin to bind us with the practice of stretching, exercising those moments and your attention to them, you begin to shape them. So if it feels too constrained in a repetition, begin to break it with your presence. Move another way. Start in a different direction. Let the mind engage with the way you are interacting with the page. Brought a little bit out of normal to feel what something else is like and decide where you want to engage with that paper. But as we fill up a lot of space, we can always make new forms to engage with if we run out. A lot of time spent in one mode can let us in to potential of it. It may also tire out the fingers or hand, and if you begin to notice that, we can switch around the attention. There's always plenty of space and more things to come back to at any time. But in the final minutes, you may also look at how these forms gather into one. Can they have an outer edge, complete or loose? Starting by finding a place of interest and offsetting that line again, but letting it go from one shape to another. For me, I see them as nestled into something, perhaps a bit of landscape embedded up against the forms. Or maybe the line just works its way all the way around, encasing it. finding new shape. It'll work for a few minutes in quiet to continue filling, layering deeper and deeper to find places of tone or fill, darkness, the gaps between the many shapes, a tissue to highlight their edges, the continued extension of the landscape, freeing some motion as you play in your space. As we approach the end of the exercise, just like in the beginning, can we use our breath, our sensation of expanding and contracting to come back to our senses, come back out of that space of practice to gradually convince the eye that we've filled plenty of space. Gradually convince the hand, slow down and calm by breathing in and letting the breath out with a little force, almost a sigh. Repeating that cycle a couple times as it draws our attention back to the whole body. When you're ready, bringing the pen or pencil to rest. An even deeper breath in, and more expressive exhalation for a couple rounds, re-engaging the shoulders, the hips, the back with a little movement. Maybe wiggling the fingers and feeling things come back into place. And as those breaths fill us with a new oxygen, letting them also fill us with sensation in our toes, our fingertips, our seat, and our posture as we exit the drawing and come back into the rest of our day. Thank you for joining. We'll see you next week. Welcome back. Today's exercise and exploration of fitting or nesting, gathering together, creating a whole out of the many, and a single element within the whole. From a design perspective, that part-to-whole relationship is an important engagement and thinking about how things operate at the very large or organizational scale and how they might operate at the very small material, tactile experience scale, and working between them with some clarity, but also playing to each strength, each position, to see what it can do. Fill out some space, define some edges, make a shape on the page. If you found something kind of interesting in your drawing, maybe a little weird looking, maybe it's those contour slices through a plant growing, or the inside of your arm or leg, a nestling of muscles and bundles supported on a single figure, that bone in the center. And whatever you discover, finding your technique in it, finding your way of moving that pen or pencil, of breathing into the shapes you configure on the page, following them into their own emergence as a figure, a form, a territory, and an idea of relaxation, of creativity, of mindful awareness and presence. If you like the video, please let me know in the comments below what you discovered. Give it a thumbs up and share with your friends. Continue to expand the community of mindful drawing. There's new videos here on YouTube, usually every week on Wednesday morning. Thank you for joining. This is Brooks is Fun signing off. Draw well.